Welcome to African Global Insights, where we explore global events through an African geopolitical lens. We connect the dots and cut through the noise to provide a pathway to solutions through greater understanding. Now, I don't know if you've noticed lately, but governments around the world just aren't working for their people right now. Promises of justice, prosperity, security, quality education, healthcare, etc. are being broken left and right, and now they're just empty words. In Africa, we see a good number of governing systems failing, and in the West, like in the EU and US as an example, there are a number of scandals that are revealing widespread corruption and criminality at the highest level. Actually, worldwide, we are seeing governing systems just corrode the public trust and sharply increase unease and frustrations in their population. In addition to that, they're pushing democracy around the world, and they themselves are turning, a lot of these countries are turning away from their own view of what democracy is. These governments aren't serving the people. This is such a familiar story. Like, children go hungry while the budgets vanish somehow. Roads crumble while elites build mansions. The majority, everyday working folks, are left scrambling, ignored by systems that prioritize power over progress. It's just not working. And it's not just a failure of execution, it's a failure of imagination and motivation on our part to a large extent. Because if these structures aren't working for most of us, then clinging to them makes no sense. As a matter of fact, clinging to them is madness. We need something new to accelerate us into the future. Now, when I was growing up, I really liked sci-fi movies as a child. One of the things, I like sci-fi movies and shows, like TV shows. And one of the things I didn't see in those movies and TV shows were people like me, were Black people. This changed a little later on. I saw one of the prominent Black people in sci-fi, after a while, was Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek. And it was played by the lovely Nichelle Nichols. And when I saw her, I was like, wow, like I could see, there's one of us in outer space, like traveling through space. So, but as I got older, I still saw us underrepresented, which kind of had an impact on what I thought that we could do when I was young, as I started to get a little bit older. So similarly, we don't see ourselves with like this bright new reality in a bright new situation where everything is working, almost like a utopia. And there are a number of reasons why. I think one of them is because we're so bogged down with daily life, and we're seeing that the governments that we're under not working. We're trying to make ends meet, we're navigating society, we're navigating relationships, and somehow this dulls our sense of wonder and imagination. And over time, it kind of beats you down to somehow accept things as they are, And a lot of what we see in our communities and countries is not ideal, to say the least. Also, there are so many problems, locally and nationally and globally, that it can give you a headache. We have so many issues. It can give you a headache just trying to holistically think about all of them and how to solve all of them. So the need really needs to be broken down into pieces and attacked that way. But still, it can be quite overwhelming to think about. That's another reason why we can't think of, that North Star or that utopia for us. There's also the education system, right? So the great Dr. Amos Wilson articulated that if the education system that you're in does not help you to solve your problems, then it is pointless, right? And as a result of all this, we have a number of coping mechanisms for this, to kind of just get us through. One of those things I've noticed is constant and persistent complaining and not doing anything. That's one of them. Maybe some of you have experienced the same thing, but some have taken to, drinking or other substances, other diversions like sports, social media, excessive social media use, other things, However, coping mechanisms only provide a temporary relief, right? So this is where the visionaries come in. Visionaries are characterized as having foresight and imagination. And why do we need visionaries? Well, like an architect, we need visionaries to give us a view of a completely different reality, a more perfect reality for our particular situation, country, city, village, whatever. Like I said, we are bogged down by everyday life, so many of us that are in our own right visionaries don't have the leisure time nor passion to just sit, think, imagine, document, collaborate, and present to others, etc. Right? Another thing with visionaries, we need them, but they need to work outside of influence of naysayers and skeptics, because that discourages them, right? At least initially, they need to be outside of that so we can think of this new reality and the new way to do things that work better for us. Many years ago, I think early 80s or so, I read a story. It was about a large telecommunications company in the United States. And they had what is called Skunk Works, right? And Skunk Works is just a division or a department that works outside of the purview of other departments. They're kind of autonomous. And this company would hire scientists to come in. It was a telecommunications company. But here's the interesting thing. They wanted scientists that didn't work in telecommunications. They wanted scientists that didn't know anything about telecommunications, really, that much, to come in and just invent new things, just tinker around with things and invent new things, new telephones, new systems, that kind of thing. And the reason that they did this is because if you have people who are working in that industry, they are confined by their thinking. They're confined by the regulations, the standards. This is how you do things. This is how you do back office. This is how we normally do networks and blah, blah, blah. And so they have a lot of reasons why you can't do something. And this company didn't want to be bound by that. They wanted someone to just come in and just think of new things, and then they would, find something that they could develop or innovate on. And that's one of the reasons why, we cannot have our visionaries bombarded with negative people initially, because they will tell you, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. It's not the way this works, and the government won't allow this and that kind of thing. You need to keep them away from there. So we need a new way to govern and manage local and national economies, because one of the biggest issues in our communities and nations is poverty and lack of resources. This is the one a lot of people bring up to me all the time. But we need visionaries to imagine a new way to create and think about things like money. What is money? Can we think of another way to define money, and how is it created? And how can we make it more equitable for everyone? Now, we need visionaries to rethink also how we govern economies, trade, the world order, our role in the world order, all of it, right? We just don't need an overhaul or an adjustment. We need radical, innovative change, because we've got to get going. Things are changing, and we need to prepare ourselves, right? So let's also think about things that bind us and those things that separate us, like a nation, right? What is a nation? So a nation is defined as a relatively large group of people organized under a single, usually independent government or country. Nations also have defined geographical boundaries that establish their sovereignty and allows them to govern themselves independently without interference from external sources. That part kind of gets me, without interference from external sources. That's a whole nother video. So in 2025, can we say that a nation is only defined by a geographical area? I don't know. Do things like passports or being characterized as a citizen of a country solidify your nationality? Do these bureaucratic ties define your culture, values, morals? Needs to be discussed. Now, we don't need to necessarily destroy existing political and legal systems. That shouldn't be the goal right now. However, in my view, I think that we should build an adjacent or parallel systems that people can start utilizing to prove in the new theory, whatever the new theory is and the new way of doing things. And then if it's proven, naturally and organically, people will then come over to a new way of doing things and leave the old way because the old way is not working. Now, make no mistake about it, this has to be done. We can no longer expose future generations to incompetent, corrupt governments, right? This has to be done. We don't have a choice. We need innovation in economics, education, entertainment, health, labor, law, politics, and war/defense. Shout out to Neely Fuller Jr. So I'll be sharing my ideas in the future in a lot of videos. I'll break some of my ideas down on some of these things, but I'd like to see your thoughts. Do you think that we need to rethink, redefine, and architect government to make it better for our people? If so, how do we harness the collective brain power to start the work of conceptualizing, prioritizing, planning? How do we just get going? Let us know in the comments section, and as always, I look forward to the conversation.